My name is Jacob Flowers. I'm the director of the Mid-South Peace and Justice Center, and I'll be moderating tonight's debate as much as possible.
However, since 2005, there have been confirmed reports of existing interior ministry-supported Shiite death squads that purposefully target Sunnis and part of the sectarian strife that is engulfing Iraq. Furthermore, Iraqi security forces have contributed to a climate of extreme violence in which people were killed for political and other reasons, and are responsible for innumerable deaths, as well as the extensive regime of torture and illegal imprisonment. All the information from this slide comes from the U.S.'s State Department Human Rights reports. So it's not coming from anybody that you could think of as biased. I mean, this is what we're saying is going on in Iraq. The bigger problem in Iraq are the non-governmental abuses and the general human rights conditions there, including those abuses committed by the coalition, but those are minor in comparison to the overall human rights conditions in Iraq. Since the invasion, there's been a marked increase in killings, kidnappings, and torture just over the past 4 years. Every year, it's been a little bit worse. It got to the point where in 2005, according to the State Department, 34,452 civilians were violently killed. That's a number that Saddam's Ba'ath government never even came close to. I mean, they never had any atrocity that ever came close to that. Even the years when they gassed the Kurds, the number 4 years since the invasion of Iraq, the material well-being of the average Iraqi has drastically diminished. And sadly, it was mentioned in the introduction that, like, hopefully we'd give you guys some solutions. I don't have one for you. In fact, I'm here to tell you that, and depress you a little bit, and say, like, from my perspective, there's little. It's easy for a lot of us to believe that all of these Iraqi deaths, all of these things that have happened in Iraq, may be worth it someday if they can achieve democracy, if they can come and be a stable democracy in the Middle East. And I'm not really in the game of trading lives for democracy, so I don't know how many lives are worth democracy or whatever. But that may be correct. That could actually be accurate. It would be worth it if Iraq was able to become a democracy. However, the odds are stacked against Iraq. The State Failure Project, that CIA-funded project that I was mentioning earlier, according to them, states whose citizens have a low material well-being are twice as likely to become failed states. Well, that's exactly what we've done. We've gone into Iraq and lowered the material well-being. Furthermore, the odds that a state will fail are tripled in states with sectarian conflicts. Iraq is obviously mired in its own sectarian conflict right now. Essentially, what this all adds up to is that we've taken a fairly stable regime that, while evil and bloody and terrible, was not a hotbed for terrorism, was not a hotbed for anything like that. And we've turned it into basically what the CIA would name as the ideal spot for fomenting a failed state. The very thing that we were afraid of.
Y'all are some smart folks. Y'all are both graduate students here at the university, and I do respect that, and I do respect your research a lot, and thank you for doing that, because that's what facts are made of, is research. But when I see that, I see a lot of fine print. You know, you hear a lot about these statistics about car bombs in Baghdad, pipe bombs in Riyadh, and kidnappings in Abu Ghraib. And all those things are horrible, and no one should have to suffer through those. But when you focus on those, you really do lose the bigger picture that this is all about. This is about a clash of civilizations. You have the United States and everyone who loves freedom, and you have the enemies of freedom, the radical Islamic jihadists. And there are a lot of people who don't take that threat seriously. You know, someone says they want to end the lives of every American and I want to cut their heads off. George Bush at least takes that threat seriously and takes them at their word for it and acts on it. And you know what? Seen any of the beheading videos online? Okay. I watched one of those sadly because I wanted to know what America's up against. What are people who hate the United States willing to do to another human being just to get at us? And when I watched the video of Nick Berg, and I know it's the terrorists want us to watch that so they can break our will. But I watched that video reluctantly. And the last thing Nick Berg heard was, probably in things he didn't understand, lots of verses from the Quran. The terrorists grabbed him by his hair, they jumped him, and they took a dull knife while he was on his knees and started sawing his head off, starting from the back. They didn't cut his head off with a sword, they sawed his head off. and they scream. And even when they were trying to pull his head off, it wouldn't pull because they were still having to cut through all the bone. Now, I don't know, did any of you see those people jumping out of the buildings 100 stories up? They had flames behind them. You know, if a handful of thugs with box cutters are able to kill 3,000 truly innocent people, I wonder what someone like that with a suitcase nuke in their hands, crossing our open borders, as you mentioned, would be able to do in New York City or Washington, D.C. That's why I'm glad our government does take this threat seriously. And there are people who are sawing off heads, who are willing to have themselves killed in suicide bombs to end every single one of your chance for a good life. And guys, I'm serious when I say this. We're going to have to put our differences beside, and we're going to have to look at that American flag, and we're going to have to be able to say, we have to unite behind the flag as one person, because unless we do that, and unless we put America first again like our grandparents did, we're not going to be able to defeat fascism like our grandparents, and we're not going to be able to defeat communism like our parents.
So I do share John's worry about the threat of terrorism, which is a very serious threat that the United States should take seriously and address. However, it is also important to note that terrorism is not a characteristic that is particular to a certain group of people. There is no such thing as the last terrorist, whom once you kill, you end the war on terror. Terrorism is merely an idea, a tactic. And the way you defeat a tactic is by making it less attractive for people to pursue. So in that sense, the war on terrorism is twofold. First is the police and the intelligence war, by which you disrupt existing terror plots and bring existing terrorists to justice. And the second aspect of it, which is no less important, is the reformation of U.S. foreign policy so that it is more fair and just, and thus discouraging terrorism and in regions where anti-Americanism is quite popular. What the war on terrorism is not is a military war by which you invade and bomb countries and cities, because that merely inflames the threat of terrorism. And in the case of Iraq, that was fairly straightforward before the invasion, where even Homeland Security said an invasion of Iraq would increase the terrorist threat to the United States. A couple of things that I would like to comment on that John mentioned that I think are worth addressing is that I disagree with this assessment about the existence of a clash of civilizations. Simply because there is no civilization that hates freedom. I mean, this is such a basic human instinct, the desire not to be ordered around and controlled by someone else against your will. So what there is people who have, individuals who have disregard for innocent human lives, who in attempting to achieve their political ends do not care who they kill in the process, and people who don't. That's what I think is the true struggle. And if you're going to give a graphic depiction of a particular beheading, what does that say about the Iraqi general who was stuffed into a bag upside down by U.S. soldiers in Abu Ghraib and suffocated to death? I mean, would it be reasonable then for Iraqis to say, these are the Americans we're up against? It's not. Those are individual. And then the biggest thing that the U.S. was flaunting as an achievement, the Bush administration, I should say, in Iraq, was the fact that elections took place and for the first time, a truly democratic government was elected in Iraq. Only the problem here is that democracy was not respected. The party that won the elections in Iraq was the United Iraqi Alliance, which called for a U.S. withdrawal from Iraq, called for an immediate timetable to be set up. And only 4 days after the elections, George Bush stated that there will not be a timetable for withdrawing from Iraq. So it was not about furthering democracy. It was obvious what the will of the Iraqi people was, as polls consistently show until today. So it's not about weapons of mass destruction, and it's not about democracy. What it is about is something we can debate, but those two things it certainly is not about. We live in a democracy, and our democracy happens to be the most powerful country in the world. So in essence, we can decide U.S. policy in a way that can shape the world. And for it to have been made so easy for us, where you don't have to be persecuted, you merely have to get up and become an active citizen. If social change to the better in the world is that easy for us, it would be a shame for us not to take action and make this world better.
Thank you.